Yeah.
All right.
Okay, so how are you doing today?
I'm good.
Yeah.
I'm very good.
Brilliant,
Yeah.
brilliant. What have you been up to?
So today, I woke up a bit late. I'll be honest with you. Midday.
Yeah,
Not
yeah.
my finest. Not
No.
my finest hour. Quite literally. But then since then, I've just been working.
Nice.
I've got a got to work on my essay for tomorrow. I've got to hand in the plan.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I've just seen the question today, so
Okay.
planning
okay.
it out.
How's the planning going? Do you like writing essay questions? Are you one of those people?
Yeah, I do. It very much depends for me how interested I am in the question.
Yeah.
It very much depends for me how interested. I mean, this one's a very interesting one. It's about crises in US democracy.
Yeah.
So it's a very interesting, very pertinent topic.
Yeah.
But like, if it's not something I want to write about, then it's like crawling through life.
Yeah.
With weights attached to you.
Okay. Yeah, nice. Are you do you like studying in the library or at home? What's your preferred?
So this is very varied. Last year I spent all my time in Blue 3 in the library main section.
Yeah.
The blue section. But I just it's too cold and utilitarian. It's something out of the Soviet Union. I can't. So
it's it's very sort of. I always feel like it's got the vibe that's haunted or something.
Yes, absolutely.
Bit dystopian.
Yeah, there's definitely you can see Brave New World. You could see Aldous Huxley writing Brave New World.
Yeah, definitely.
This year, where possible, I tried to go to the Central Library.
Okay.
Up in the city centre.
Is that the big
one in St Peter's Square? Yeah, it's
Oh,
really
nice.
great. I'd recommend.
Never been
going.
there. Never
recommend
been there.
going. Absolutely.
Do you have to get a library card or something?
No,
or do you
just walk in.
Really? Oh.
Yeah, just walk in.
Never knew that. Wow,
Yeah.
what a shame.
No, I know exactly. I don't think many people do, and not sure I want many people to do so.
Yeah,
then all the tables
It's
will
a
get
lot
taken
nicer.
out. A lot nicer. Yeah.
Is it mainly students who work there, or is it?
It's really hard. Sorry.
Oh yeah, well, that's all I was asking.
It's really hard to tell.
Yeah.
I'd say so though. I'd say there's definitely some older people there.
Yeah.
But they could be mature students, so it's kind of hard to tell really.
Well, one thing I often find strange is there's that John Rylands library in Spinningfields.
Yeah.
I remember going to it like when I first came out to Manchester. Just never been to it since.
Really?
But that's a beautiful library.
It's a great library.
And yeah, like people just don't make the most of that.
No, I do agree with you on that. It's like, I'll be honest with you, I was under the impression it was shut in our first year.
Yeah,
I thought it was shut, so I just never went. I've been a bit this year.
Yeah.
It's a bit weird though, because you're there studying, and you're right, take advantage of it. But you're there studying, there's people coming around, there's tourists coming around.
Yeah.
You
You feel like a kind of. Yeah, it's like Manchester's sort of nice Hogwarts.
Yeah,
sort of environment.
Kind of like what the one be, the Bodleian Library at Oxford.
Yeah,
kind of like that,
yeah.
but in Manchester.
Exactly.
So far cooler.
Exactly. So tell me about Fuze TV. Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely.
How'd you get involved with it to begin with?
So it's quite a long story actually.
Yeah.
It started out this year. I actually originally wanted to pitch a Fuze FM show.
Yeah. What was the show?
The show was going to be a political impression show.
Oh,
so the
nice.
show was going to
Very
be
nice.
you get people, you get Donald Trump.
Yeah.
You got all these individuals, and I was going to do that, and I had all these great ideas, I had all these great sketches written down. I went along to the meeting, and I just realised, like, it's going to take up too much time. Like, it was end second semester, second year. It's like, I've got a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
I can't. But Anya, the very, very nice woman who does all the MMG stuff, can't credit her enough. She was talking about people who wanted to do news, and I thought, well, okay, I can do news. And then I started going along, and it was we just started making kind of the news updates.
Yeah.
So we just sat there and we just film, kind of like now. We just sit there and we just film and talk about the news, and and update the news. And then this year, it was on our WhatsApp group. There was something about who's going to take over Fuze News this year, and I was kind of I'll be honest, I was a bit hesitant at first.
Yeah.
Because I've got a lot on this year.
Yeah.
A lot on.
Of course.
And I'd already bitten off more than I can chew with various different co-curricular, extracurricular stuff.
Yeah.
And so I was like, do I know? Do I want to do it? And I thought about it for about an hour in the library, and I was like, do I want to do it? And my gut was telling me, yeah, go for it, but my brain was kind of like, don't do it. And I listened to my gut, and it was the right decision.
Yeah.
Decision.
Fantastic. So what sort of responsibilities do you have as the head?
So it's kind of whatever I want it to be. It's but there's a couple of key events throughout the year. The UCU strikes and things, which are obviously they're big events. There's big events come up which we need to cover, and sorry, kind of just keeping tabs on things that are affecting students. Keeping tabs on world affairs. There's enough of them. There's enough of them going on any one day. There's enough of that. So yeah, I mean, really, just kind of. I've got the meeting after this, so organising the meetings, getting people to come along. Come along. And that's kind of the.
Sick. So you're very engaged with the world stage then?
Yeah.
What do you make about Russia and Ukraine at the moment?
Very
hot
good
topic,
question.
but,
No, absolutely a hot topic. I think it just seems to be the tragedy that keeps on dragging on. It just seems to be. Although I think, of course, there've been a couple of big victories for the Ukrainian side. There've been a couple of big victories for the Ukrainian side. I think it's just a terrible tragedy, like all war, really. It's a terrible tragedy. But hopefully, we're edging into a stalemate, really, is the truth of it. We're edging into a long, protracted war. But I hope I'm wrong about that.
Yeah, I mean, what do you think's the best case scenario if Ukraine push the Russians completely out, right to the border? What happens next? Does Putin accept defeat?
Sorry, I don't mean to.
No. I mean that's yeah.
It's really interesting you asked me this because actually I was working over the summer and I was speaking to a man, fascinating man, who is actually he's Russian himself, but he's got a political science PhD from University College London, and he's obviously got his ear to the ground what's happening in Russia, and I think the truth is that Putin's finished if this war does not go his way. He's really kind of shot his bolt. But the fear is, what do we get next? Because we don't. It's like with Iran, another big issue at the moment. Just because Putin falls doesn't mean we necessarily get some nice guy comes in and fixes everything. We could get somebody worse than the current government.
Yes, that's very true. And then there's it just makes the pressure even worse. So what? I mean, obviously we're talking very theoretically, but in your opinion, do you think if Ukraine succeed, Putin's gonna lose popularity in Russia and is gonna have to resign?
It's the wisdom that this gentleman I speak to over the summer told me is that the sanctions haven't really worked thus far. But this was a few months ago, so bear in mind
the Western
sanctions on Russia. I think, but
why not?
Because I believe it's because China and India are still buying Russian oil and natural gas. They've still got a massive market of I mean. India and China, there's not exactly short of people needing oil and natural gas there. I think what I believe will lead to the situation, or what I've kind of read will lead to the situation, is when the body bags really start piling up. When Russian soldiers start being sent home dead, and grieving Russian mothers and families start to wonder, well, hang on, what are we fighting about? Because ultimately, the other big thing, which is a massive problem for, he thought it was going to be his great success, Putin. But his great problem is that the Russians and Ukrainians view themselves as kind of being one and the same, and he thought that means they'll acquiesce and they'll give up immediately, but it hasn't meant that. It's meant the opposite. It's meant that Russians have questioned, well, hang on, why are we fighting another Slavic country?
When their history's so tied together.
Very
as well.
The Rus, and the kind of exactly.
No, I do find it interesting because Ukraine is this weird. It's weird identity that's so. It's had so much of its history closely intertwined with Russia, kind of like Scotland and England, I guess.
Absolutely. Or Wales and England.
Or Wales and England, probably a better example. But there is still this kind of identity to it, and Russian's kind of spoken in Ukraine.
Yes.
But then they also have the national language Ukrainian. It's really interesting.
And it's interesting as well that you bring that up because. For 2 points, because not only has Ukraine got a new national legend now in the form of the resistance against the Russian invasion, which is solidifying their national identity, but you've also got Volodymyr Zelensky is a native Russian speaker. His first language is Russian. His mother tongue is Russian.
Wow.
So confusing situation.
It's very interesting identity. No, I mean it really just came out of nowhere, I think.
Very much so. I mean, I remember the day it happened because I woke up and I was I woke up a bit late that day, I'll be honest with you. And I rolled out of bed and I checked my phone and I was getting all these messages off people about, kind of, oh my God, what's happening? What's happening? I'm like, okay, all right, whatever.
Yeah,
and then I turn on, and then I open, then it's like, the BBC News when you've got like a massive story.
yeah.
And it's like the whole page is like just flashing red. And it was like, Russia launches full-scale invasion. And I'd literally read the night before, I was reading an academic paper on it for an essay I was working on that said, here are the scenarios that are going to happen in order of probability. And it had like A+ means probably quite likely, most likely scenario, to like D- was like, it's not going to happen. Or there's like a very small chance of it happening. And the D- one right at the bottom, kind of buried as if it didn't really warrant talking about, was, full-scale invasion. But
seriously?
Yeah.
Wow.
Of course, we live in the age of upsets, don't we?
That's the thing. I mean, you really don't know what to expect from the 21st century.
Yeah, life anymore, really, do you? I mean, no, it's...
How weird, yeah. And that was at the time when you started reporting for Fuze? Okay. What was that like, reporting about...
Yeah, well, it was a little strange, obviously turning up. It was kind of turning up into, a very welcoming atmosphere, it has to be said. It was a very welcoming atmosphere. But it was strange to turn up and suddenly sit down and basically, so we'd write a story each week, and I was writing about the Homes for Ukraine scheme, I think, which was the government at the time, 60 governments ago, whatever it is, at the time, their scheme to obviously sponsor Ukrainian refugees to come to the UK. And it was just quite surreal, really, to be writing about this event that was so unprecedented. War in Europe, kind of the wisdom when I was like 13 years old and when I was interested in all this stuff was like, war in Europe is like it's a relic of the past. We live in a more enlightened age. It doesn't happen anymore. Other than Bosnia, it doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah.
But no, strange.
That is probably the most scary thing, is that it's the first time in my life that a war's taking place in my own continent.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I think it was Louis Theroux that was saying this. Like, I think a lot of people feel in the UK that like it's just really scary that the unthinkable kind of happens. And there's an actual war.
Yeah, I know.
People dying. And it really does. It really does kind of give you a kick up the arse in terms of what. Like how you frame the world's your worldview, and like we're not really that safe as we think, and it's been a big influence in my life to think like, I can't. There's no point in trying to be safe in a way. You got these terrible things are going to happen. Maybe some more terrible things will happen. Maybe we'll be slightly more affected by them. Maybe we won't, but. It's like the real revelation I got from it was like, this is you gotta be stronger than this, because life is full of things like this that happen all the time.
Absolutely.
And that's something that we've really forgotten in the West.
How
true do you think? Because I think in Western Europe we had this idea that like England, Ireland, France, Germany, they're all nice countries, and America and Canada's nice, but apart from that, everything's pretty shit. How true do you think that is?
I think, as in, like, so we live in this bubble, and then there's other parts of the world which are very troubled.
Yeah.
Certainly, like 40 years ago, not to sound patronised, but like 40 years ago, I'd say there was a lot more truth than there is. Now it's a lot more complicated. You've got cities in China, you've got cities in India, which are really developed now, and Africa, that are really developed now. I mean, even you think about Rwanda. I was watching a video about, obviously Rwanda's got a horrible history, very, very horrible recent history. But but now they're, kind of the Singapore of Africa. It's a lot more confused now than it was back then. And I think the truth is, there's a lot of parts of the world, that more people move to Mexico from the US than move from Mexico.
Seriously?
Yeah, more because the house prices are high on the US border region, so Americans move to Mexico. The picture's a lot more complicated now than it was
I mean, that's
once.
the what got me thinking about this was I was talking to this American guy who had lived a lot of his life in Mexico.
Oh yeah.
And I was like, oh, what was it like living in Mexico? Is it as like rough as everyone says? And he was like, no, like America's more dangerous than Mexico. And that really got me thinking, like, is England? I mean, is England real, that safe, and all that untroubled really? Because I want to think the whole world is filled with, everything's kind of as nice as everything else. I don't like the idea that
no, absolutely.
only we are as safe as it is. But yeah, it's an interesting idea. And
this is very, But I think as well, kind of we've had that bubble of safety shattered in recent years. But even just you think about that terrible stabbing in Fallowfield. It does happen.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of issues. I mean, I've grown up and I've been very lucky in my youth to be insulated from a lot of issues. That since I've come to Manchester, I've become, become aware are a lot more widespread. Drink spiking is the obvious one.
That is very true.
Like, I would have had no idea. I mean, it's something I've seen on the news, and you kind of think, oh, it's terrible. But how common can it really be? And then since I've come here, like, it's very common.
That I've been appalled by just how many people have had their drink spikes.
I know.
Or worse. It's just I had no sense of that before. No, you're right. I mean, I think I was similar. I grew up in quite a small town and spent most of my life in a village. And it's very interesting coming to a big city because life feels so. There's so many. It's just a lot less insulated, like you said.
Yeah. You're confronted with the and the truth is, it's an interesting point you brought about how is the world safe? Well, is Britain safe? I mean, is Britain safe? I think that's a valid question.
Yeah.
We're seeing really rising rates of knife crime on the streets, with the exception of cities like Glasgow, which have implemented very effective anti-knife campaigns, public health and education campaigns. We are really seeing, the tabloids love to quote things like broken Britain, lawless Britain. Mm-hmm. It's not like that, but it's like it's certainly these things happen. Bad things happen in this country, and it's interesting as well that you bring that up because I at the end of the summer I visited LA. On the border.
Okay.
And it was a fantastic trip, but it was slightly surreal to me because I've spent so many years, particularly since 2020, following with a very heavy heart.
Yeah.
I'm not saying left wing or right wing, the developments in the United States, and there have been a lot of things I've thought, oh my God, I grew up, idolizing the United States as a child, thinking, it's the greatest country in the world, and in recent years, there have been some very troubling things that have happened in the United States, but the weird part was you went there, and, of course, a lot of people say, it's all just social media, it's not actually that bad, and that's a perfectly valid point, but, you go there kind of thinking, what's it going to be like, what's it going to be, and you think about, like, the images you saw in 2020 of New York State where they had to bring in military ships. Mm-hmm. 1 million people have died of COVID-19 in the United States, like at least. And it's like, you go there and it's just like life just goes on. And it's something I actually hear as well, kind of from people who, like for instance, Damascus is now actually beginning to open up as a tourist destination again now.
Seriously?
You are beginning to see travel YouTubers.
That's
slightly more out there ones going to Damascus, even Aleppo, but Aleppo's still really recovering from the wounds of the war.
That is fascinating to me. I was watching this YouTuber who went to visit Afghanistan since the Taliban invasion.
Which one is it? Is it
Borden Bank?
Borden Bank.
I know you've seen it as well.
Yeah.
And he what's the capital called?
Kabul.
Yeah. He was saying that Kabul in the 70s was a tourist destination.
Yeah.
Isn't that so weird to think now?
It's so strange to think about, but it's absolutely. I discussed this last night. It's absolutely true as well, though, because you look at the situation in Iran.
Yeah.
And of course, that's a massive one. But Iran in the 70s was seen as being one of the real liberal parts of the Middle East. Prior to the Islamic Revolution, it really was one of the liberal parts of the Middle East.
Yeah. No, it's funny how quickly things change.
Yeah, I know.
Is there any particular region that when you're talking a lot about the reporting internationally, is that something you enjoy most? Do you prefer international stuff? Okay.
I think it's more interesting because there's so many human stories out there that aren't just in the UK.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you definitely.
Yeah.
I think it's the real interesting stuff. Is there a region that interests you most?
I mean, certainly. I mean, the obvious. The standout. I apologise for keeping calm.
No, don't
The
worry.
standout answers are the USA or China.
Okay. Yeah.
Particularly at the moment, I'd say since I've started doing the news, I did say I was going to focus more on Manchester, and that's very important to me because obviously there's a lot of stories in this city that affect students that don't get reported on. I think that's very important. But if you want to talk about what really interests me, it's the USA or China.
Why is that? Just because they're the two big.
And they're so contradictory too.
Yeah.
I mean, you've seen over the last 2 years, you've seen problematic issues of democracy in both countries, but you've seen their cultural values thrust into the limelight in such different ways. With the zero COVID policy in China, which is something which I promised my friend I would talk about on the news. He's in China on the condition that he wouldn't, try and fight the police. You've seen such country, in the US, you've seen places where people will, not wear face masks and things.
Yeah.
I mean, same in this country, But in China, you've seen this really top-down, authoritarian approach that I just don't think we can even. I watched videos about it. I don't think you can even comprehend what it's like. Here.
Yeah, it's pretty terrifying. I mean, how effective do you think? How not effective because it is effective, but how necessary do you think that sort of policy is? How 2-3 years on from the first infections, do you think a zero policy is good, or do you think it's a way to control the populace?
It's I mean, the obvious answer is no, it's not good now.
Yeah.
I think it probably was, not in the Chinese way, but in the Australian or New Zealand way, it probably was a good strategy at the start. I do still maintain that. I do think that's a good way of containing it at the start. But it's also dependent on local context too.
Yeah.
And I think the thing about China is that China's elderly population, Confucian philosophy puts a huge value on the elderly and on filial piety, as it's pronounced.
Okay.
And kind of reverence for your elders.
Yeah.
China's elderly are not very well vaccinated.
Okay.
So what you're seeing is, and also the hospital systems aren't particularly well prepared. So I don't know, and they've vilified Western vaccines. So they've created a really difficult way out. But ultimately, at the end of the day, since the protests have started, the politics has triumphed over the public health, and that's I think what's happened around the world. USA, China, the UK, New Zealand, anywhere in the last 2 years, politics has triumphed over the public health.
What do you mean by that?
I think every government has thought what helps our chances of staying in power with COVID. And I think when it comes down to the line, you've seen that they will think about what will keep them in power.
Yes.
I mean, you look at Australia last year, Australia had some of the strictest pandemic responses in the entire world for the first 2 years, and then suddenly an election rolls around in May of 2022.
Yeah.
And by late 2021, they're going, oh no, right, time to give up on that. And, a lot of people caught COVID in Australia.
Yeah.
Because the government clearly just thought, we don't really want to do this anymore.
Yeah. How much sympathy do you have with the sort of Swedish approach of just letting people take their own risks and, the sort of more...
Yeah.
I mean, I perceive that as more sort of, in the traditional sense, more liberal. It's but obviously it was very criticised at the time. Do you, what's the pros and cons of that in your opinion?
The Swedish response was, I mean, it's a very interesting one. I think, because I discussed a lot with my friend and I we didn't see eye to eye on the height of the pandemic on lockdowns, and he was a really fastidious advocate of the Swedish approach. The one thing you have to remember about the Swedish approach is that Sweden is a far more compliant country than the UK is. If you tell people in Sweden you should wear a mask, people are far more likely to do it than they are here. I think the Sweden was a success beyond what you would have thought it would have been a complete failure. As somebody who defended lockdowns throughout the pandemic, you can't hide from that. It was a success. Well, no, it wasn't. I wouldn't say it was a success. It was a bigger success than it was we expected it to be.
Yeah.
The King of Sweden himself came out on the news and said to the government, this was a really bad idea, you shouldn't have done this, which is a bit of a shocking indictment, really. But I think it remains to be seen, and I think the truth is there's a lot of different lessons can be learned from the age of COVID.
Yeah.
As I'm writing my dissertation on, so that's
really. Are you?
I am indeed. Yes.
Wow.
Yes, lessons from HIV/AIDS and COVID-19 on pandemic management.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
What's your obviously you're just starting it. But
No, I've got some stuff I can talk about.
What's your thoughts on it?
So this is interesting because this leads on to another kind of topic quite similar to the one about Sweden. One of the things which has really stood out to me so far in my research is, we have this idea that we live in this post-truth age, and that Donald Trump appeared and he started going like, you should inject, hydrochloroquine. I can't pronounce it, but you should inject bleach. And we've and since then we've seen this decline of truth, whereas the reality is, you look back to the 80s, you look back to the bubonic plague, people, when they don't understand what's happening, they don't understand the pathology behind it, they resort to conspiracy theories. The same is true, there's a current terrible outbreak of the Ebola virus in Uganda, and people believe it's not real. People believe it's been invented by Western governments to, inject a vaccine into people. Now, it's interesting to talk about that, as I kind of don't want to jump off the point, but it's interesting to talk about it because, Ebola virus is something which has a 40% fatality rate. With COVID, you can understand why people would be reticent to take a vaccine for a virus where they think, I don't need it, it's fine, it'll be fine. With Ebola, your chance of dying is quite...
pretty...
But it's interesting how that mistrust of government and that mistrust of public health authorities has existed since the dawn of time. And social media might have made it easier for it to spread, but it's not a new thing. But the other key thing is transparency is key. And I think this is an interesting one because a lot of governments responded to COVID, with things like mandates and, if you look at President Biden in the United States, he said that companies' employees over, I think it was 100, have to vaccinate. They have to mandate their employees to get vaccinated. And that might not necessarily be the best way. Maybe even lockdowns themselves are not the best way to go, because if you're dealing with conspiracy theories, the worst thing you can do is make it look like, you can't challenge what we're saying. Because if you think about the world from the conspiratorial point of view, if you're not allowed to talk about something, well, that's a sign that you're right.
Which was one of the things that I thought was a problem with the way COVID was dealt, is that there wasn't a sense that you could challenge what was being said. It's kind of weird. It's a weird time because it was not the stuff that you're challenging didn't even have to be wrong necessarily. Like take masks as a good example. It's like, it's really anyone's guess if certainly at a time where they helped or not. And there's kind of good evidence both directions. I mean, you've got a massive thing over your mouth. You'd think that would do something. But at the same time, there's these tiny little particles that are really going to do anything. But I think what like the big problem with what made COVID such a divisive issue was that there was no real ability to challenge whether they actually helped or not, and doing so was seen as kind of threats to public health.
Yeah, and I think that's the interesting one. And I think the medical evidence on mask wearing is is conclusively that yes, wearing a mask, with the respiratory virus, wearing a mask does stop the spread of the virus.
Okay.
So you should, in a case like that, you should wear a mask.
Is that how long has that been known for?
So the interesting one was there were a lot of problems were caused in the United States because the CDC in February of 2020 issued a study which kind of implied that mask wearing wouldn't be particularly effective. But they think this was done because they didn't want people rushing into stores and stockpiling masks when they needed them for healthcare workers at that point. I'd say one of the other interesting points from meditation is science is constantly evolving. And I think this is another thing which is important to remember when you talk about anything like COVID, climate change. Science is constantly evolving. It's not, it's aspiring for truth. But it's also, and this is the problem with pandemic communications, and this is why I come back to your question about how long have we known this? Well, the truth is that it changes. Studies come out and you get studies that suggest, it doesn't help. You get studies that suggest, no, it's very important. And so it's very hard to necessarily, if you're Dr. Fauci or you're Donald Trump, you're Boris Johnson delivering a talk about a pandemic, saying, is masking effective? Well, you have to wait for the studies to be done. With something like vaccination, there's a lot of ethical hoops to go through to get studies done. You know, vaccinating kids is obviously not something you can just, sticking a needle into kids, and you've got to go through a lot of testing before you can get to that point. It's a very complex one. And the problem is that COVID has really put the onus on us as critical thinkers and as members of a critical society to kind of decide the science for ourselves, which is, you know, a lot in the age of the internet. There's a lot of stuff on there which just isn't true, you know, and it's hard to know the truth sometimes.
At the time in which we're recording this,
Yes.
I think India has just overtaken China or is en route to take. I don't know if they've actually overtaken yet, but there's
Population.
The population is due to overtake at some point. What do you think about that? How's that going to change the world?
I think how's that going to change the world? Well, China's relaxed its one-child policy. You can now have, I believe it's three kids in China.
Yeah.
The obvious, I don't know if it's going to change the world per se. I think, unfortunately, I can only see that having negative effects in the parts of the world like India, Bangladesh. You're going to see enormous problems with, you know, flooding and issues with potentially kind of overpopulation in those parts of the world. I fear that it's a negative rather than a positive. I think
that area is quite vulnerable to flooding.
Ecological issues, how it's going to change the world politically? Well, I mean, obviously there's a lot of problems in India at the moment. I don't think it'll change it that much. I don't think we're going to see like India emerge as like a new superpower just because it's got more people. But I ultimately also don't think China is destined to be a superpower either. So it's a complex one. It's a very complex one.
Okay. What do you think China? Why do you think China's not destined to become a superpower?
I think it's too corrupt. It's too. It's got no soft. No one really wants China. People make pragmatic alliances with China. The great success of the US. I mean, the UK's great success. We had big ships, and no one's going to tell us what to do because we turned up with big ships. The US's great success is you've got things like Hollywood, and you had films like, you know, I don't know what's an example. You had films like Coming to America, you know, that one with Eddie Murphy early in his career, where he's like an African prince and he goes to Queens to try and find a woman who'll love him, not just because he's the king.
Haven't watched it.
I wouldn't recommend. It's not very good,
really?
actually. But you had these films that these great films, you know, and people thought, wow, Top Gun's the classic example. People thought, wow, America's great. Look at that. They've got really great planes. They've got, you know, Eddie Murphy and Queens. You know, you've got all these. You know, China doesn't really have that. They've not got this. They've not got. No one wants what China's got. But that's not true. But like, only kind of troubled governments want what China's got.
What's that exactly? Just the power of like, all the people that they have to control, or?
It's what they call the Beijing Consensus, which is, I can't recall the exact precepts to mind, but it's basically an alternative to the Washington Consensus method of, if you cut regulations and you cut taxes, your economy will grow. That's oversimplifying it. But China controls the economy. Yes and no. But, you know, China's a totalitarian state where ultimately, you know, Huawei, Jack Ma from Alibaba, you know, all these people who've been all these billionaires, they are ultimately at the behest of the state. That's what we've seen recently, is that, you know, these billionaires, if they get too big for their boots, you know, you're not going to get, you know, someone like Jeff Bezos appearing in China, because if they get too big, the government will just pull the carpet from underneath their feet. And, you know, I think Jack Ma, last checking, had been seen in public once. He was China's richest man. He'd been seen in public once in like a couple of years.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, they're not messing around.
Yeah,
particularly now. They're not messing around now.
It's pretty
They're
terrifying.
really not messing around now.
Would you ever like to go to China, or have you ever been to China?
I've been to Beijing.
Have you? Wow.
I've been to Beijing when I was 16 years old. It was a fantastic trip. I'd love to go back. I wanted to go back to a city called Kunming.
Okay.
In the south, in Yunnan province in the south, but it was February of 2020, so it became impossible.
That's annoying. I had a friend who, a family friend who was travelling around China at the time of, like just before COVID. and he was in Wuhan like
Wow, yeah.
like a couple of weeks before the first.
That's fascinating. Yeah.
Oh man, imagine. And he had to leave, get like an emergency flight home.
Oh, he was repatriated.
And he left all his stuff in his flat where he was living, like his computer, everything.
Yeah.
And he still hasn't got it back. Like 3 years later.
Oh dear, that's not so good, is it?
Pretty hilarious.
No, I mean, I know, I was speaking to somebody last year, a very, very lovely guy, but he was from Wuhan. He lived through the first lockdown. Of course, you ask him, well, what was it like? But the truth is, we all know what it was like because it came to everywhere immediately afterwards. But I still remember, because I was at the University of York seeing my friends the day that the first UK case was reported. Now, we know it was here before. We know it was spreading before. And I don't want to take it back onto COVID, sorry, but I was at the University of York, and and my friends were students there. And we went, and it was in the hotel like a couple of minutes away from there. The first case was, and of course at that time it was terrifying. And it was like, oh my god, what is this? What's this virus? It's there, and it was there. And they got an email came in saying there has been a coronavirus. Of course, that's what it was called. It was coronavirus case reported at the university.
That's pretty fascinating.
Yeah. But I'd love to go back to China. I'd love to go. I fear that it's not what it was. I fear that it's really becoming a lot more totalitarian now. We all know about Xinjiang. We all know about various issues.
What's Xinjiang?
So Xinjiang is the Chinese name for the province in the far west, which is populated largely by the Uyghur ethnic minority group.
Yeah.
Now, facts are obviously obscured about it, and I'm a truth seeker. I don't believe in necessarily believing either side. I try and find out objective facts, but the objective facts are now that the UN has published a report stating that there's been sterilization of Uyghurs. Uyghurs have been rounded up into camps. There have been forced abortions. There's been all sorts of atrocious crimes against humanity going on there, and it does now amount to genocide against the Uyghur. And of course, that cannot be tolerated. That's so that creates for me an ethical issue with going to China again now, because they're this state that is rounding people up and putting them in camps, and that's a reality I think we have to confront.
Yeah.
Particularly if we're going to trade with them. How does that change our relationship?
What do you do about that? Because I agree, like, something should be done.
Yeah.
But how do you confront someone like China? Not to shy away from the issue, but I think
no, you're right.
To deal with it seriously and find a way to at least address the problem, you do have to square up to the fact that China is just like, what you can't really tell China what to do. It's the terrifying thing.
I mean, with someone like Myanmar, where with the Rohingya situation, with I mean, Myanmar, who's Myanmar going to fight? They're a tiny country.
Exactly,
it's kind of, they're the little guy who's doing something bad. It's kind of like, if you're in a situation where you're like, you see somebody doing something you don't like, and one of them's like a little weedy guy, and the other one's like absolutely, and he's like your boss as well.
Yeah.
It's like, what on earth are you meant to do about that? And I think it's a very difficult one, because the reality is that geopolitics is always going to come. A lot of people have their money in China. A lot of people running our societies have their money in China. And can you trust them to think with the greater good? I don't think so. I think the best solution I can think of the top of my head is call it genocide. I mean, the US has stopped imports of Xinjiang cotton. So that's an important one, because that's allegedly a big part of the human rights abuse there, is they're picking cotton in Xinjiang.
Yeah.
So it's I'm definitely never getting to China again now, am I? So I think obviously that's limiting goods. I mean, the number one thing we can do in the West is get our corporations in line. And I think it's interesting because you've got these people like Nike. Nike put out all these ads all the time about, I mean, I remember with the Colin Kaepernick thing, I don't particularly want to get into that, but they put out this ad about stand for what you believe in, just do it.
Yeah.
And then, they're standing for, they're using genocide slave labor in China.
Yeah.
I'm not commenting one way or the other on the issue, I just think that's massive hypocrisy there.
Yeah. I mean, that's the awful thing, is that we're just so reliant on Chinese goods, and we all know it's conducted in a very unethical way. And you can say, but this sort of the sweatshops have lifted so many people out of poverty, and that's true. But it's obviously not nice to think that so much of what makes life convenient and so many corporations that we might like are just relying on all these awful living work conditions.
Yeah, I know. But I mean, we're sat here in Manchester. You look 200 years in the past, and
exactly.
it's here,
Exactly.
and it goes around the world and it loops, and they'll always find somewhere where people are poor and willing to to work for.
Yeah, and it's a question of, because no one questions it's a bad thing, but it's how idealistic are you going to be about it? And I don't know. How pragmatic can you be?
It's a very interesting question. And I think the reality is, of course, in an ideal world, we'd want everyone, and there is a basic standard of living that every human being should have. I think that's something we can agree on.
What do you think characterises a basic standard of living?
I think it would be a lot more basic than people would think it is in this country. I don't know that much about it, but I know there's a push from the World Economic Forum to move away from this kind of materialistic, possessive model of the economy, which is undeniably doing us harm too. I think ultimately, it's interesting because I'm very interested in Buddhist philosophy, and I think it's true that we're never going to be we're never going to be satisfied, but you do need a basic level, and I'd say the basic level is shelter. Obviously, ability to feed yourself, ability to heat your own home, ability to have your own home, and some leisure time. There's 996 in China, which is you work 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week. Some leisure time, and that was and some. You don't really. No, in the modern age, you probably do need a smartphone. But that's aspirational. To say everyone in the world should have a smartphone. Yes. Car ownership is not the way to go anyway.
Because it's unsustainable in the long term.
And you couldn't have everyone having a car. When you look at cities like Mumbai in India, you couldn't have everyone having a car in Mumbai, and it's bad enough as it is. Bad enough down Oxford Road.
Honestly, the Curry Mile.
Curry Mile, that's the place.
The amount of times I've almost got run over when I'm cycling on that.
I know.
How much leisure time do you think you should have? Because I think in the West we live in this very we really emphasise a lot of. We think leisure time is very important, but I think there's a danger that does more harm than good sometimes. And I think a lot of your pleasure and fulfillment does come from your work. I think that's what makes people like Andrew Tate so popular, is because he's just so against this leisure thing, and that he believes very strongly in just working. That's the only thing you can do. But I would say probably to an extreme. But I think that's part of what makes him popular. What do you think? How important is leisure time?
I'd say it's very important. I'd say some leisure. I do agree with you though. I think you risk, and I know this myself from the lockdown years. When you have nothing to do. I ended up with a gap year where I didn't go to China. I was doing Duolingo Chinese a couple of hours, an hour a day, and then I had nothing else to do. And it's not fulfilling. It's not fulfilling life. You're not fulfilled when you're you've got nothing. You need structure. You need a reason to get out of bed in the morning. And so I think you need some leisure time. I think. There's the idea that's been going around for ages of the 3-day weekend. 3-day weekend is coming. I don't know though. I feel like the current system of 5 days, 2 days is a pretty good one. Although the weekend, of course, is becoming a bit of a lot of people aren't working that way anymore. But I'd say you need to do more work than not work. I'd say this as a third-year student who woke up at 12 today. But you need to do more work than not work. Otherwise. What are you really doing with your time?
No, I agree. You're being very disparaging about your what time you've been waking up. I woke up at 12 today as well, so don't worry. But,
I was out last night.
Really?
I give myself.
What were you doing last night?
So it was the MMG Manchester Media Group ball.
Okay.
It was the
Nice.
Christmas ball. So it was a lovely evening.
Sick,
lovely
sick.
evening.
Where was that on the campus? Or?
It was somewhere. I can't remember the name of it. Somewhere just down the back of Oxford Road Station. You know where there's the big student.
Oh.
What's it called? Artisan Heights or something down there.
I
It's
know
like a
the
social
place you
place down there
Yeah.
with a graffiti and all. It was with the graffiti. That doesn't narrow it down in Manchester.
Yeah. Is it the bit under that tunnel, or is it?
No, it's very near with the Thirsty Scholar, and
Yeah.
it's
okay.
not there.
Okay.
It's just behind there, but it's very, very close. Down
I
Revolution, you turn
I
up.
think I know the building. Yeah, I can't remember what it's called, but
Yeah,
nice.
no,
nice.
It was a good evening though. Good evening.
Good.
evening.
Yeah. But do you have a morning routine you stick to? This is something that I'm really trying to put in at the moment.
No, I agree with you. I'm trying very hard. So I actually, I have my aspiration, which I meet about 2 days a week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which is out of bed at 8:45 because I figured trying too early wasn't working. I was trying 7:30 for a long time, and my body clock would go to sleep at 1 a.m, get up at 10:30. If it was left to its own device, that's what I would do.
Yeah.
But out of bed at 8:30, I get up, I'd set an intention for the day, and I go, right, what do I want to get done today? I'll do that. And then I'd do some exercise, do some meditation, have a cold shower, and then start the day with breakfast and read the news. And read the news is an important part. As I say, I meet that about 2 days a week.
Yeah.
Usually it's more like 9:30, kind of fall out of bed. I do the meditation every morning though. I do that every morning.
What's that? Just a guided mindfulness?
No,
app?
I use mantras. I'm a big fan of mantra meditation.
Okay, nice.
I believe that gives me more than just the mindfulness.
Yeah,
But I do just enjoy. I mean, for me, my brain is very frenetic. It jumps around all the time, which is not good when you're trying to study for many hours a day.
Yeah.
So you need to kind of calm it down a bit. That's the.
Yeah, I've started meditating a bit, like staring at a candle for 10-20 minutes. Very hypnotic.
Yeah.
Very easy as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, I recommend that. But you can't do it too much because it damages your eyes.
Oh, does it really?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. So staring at a candle for a long period of time damages your eyes.
Well, you have to do it a lot, but
you have to be like Zen,
several hours a day.
Dalai Lama.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. What sort of exercise is it? Is it running?
So I've actually started going to the gym this year, which is good.
Nice.
Because I walk all the time.
Yeah.
I spend so much of my life walking. Just put headphones on, just walk around Manchester. I think I've walked every street in Manchester city centre at some point. I love that, and that's a really great practice. But I've started doing weights. I do push-ups in the morning. I plank. I was getting into a really good streak with planking for a time.
Yeah.
But
how long could you do it for?
I could do it for 3.5 minutes at my peak.
That's pretty impressive.
But I haven't done it. That was a few weeks ago now. I'm back down to about 2 at the moment.
It goes quite quickly, I find.
It does go quickly.
You
if you don't do it.
You've got to re-maintain it.
Oh, it does go quickly.
Yeah. No, my ambition at the moment is just to really dedicate myself to going to the gym.
Yeah.
Because it's so. I mean, you just can't. It's just not worth doing anything else in terms of improving your life.
Yeah.
If you don't have like something similar to going to the gym. It's just that's the kind of baseline thing. And it's amazing how much your life improves when you have
absolutely.
a bit of. I mean, it doesn't even have to be that much, but just a little bit. And I mean, just mental health, physical well-being is just enormous.
No, I think it's a great, and I think as well you can't do too much at once. One mistake I've made, I mean, I've been trying to get into, self-improvement routines. So I was 17, I remember when I was 17 I had this great, I'm going to ace my A-levels and I'm going to start, I'm going to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger by the age of 20 and that sort of thing. I resolved that. And the truth is that I tried to bite off more than I could chew and I didn't have the discipline down to even do one thing right.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, that's kind of not really going to work very well. You've got to get one thing right. And as I say, I think going to the gym has been great for me.
Yeah. No, I think that's very true. Like, I think the problem with too much self-improvement watching is it's just not realistic up to a point.
Yeah.
But actually, it's much more effective just to do one small thing.
Absolutely.
And just really commit to that, and it's amazing how quickly you snowball, and it doesn't even really doesn't feel like it takes discipline up to a certain point, because your mind goes, oh, this is what I do now.
Yeah, I've got to the point with journaling and with walking, and to some extent with meditation, where my brain has accepted it as a habit.
Yeah.
The others, I struggle with that. The gym, still no. Obviously, I'm recovering from a respiratory cough thing at the moment. And I've been using that as an excuse to not go for like, oh no, I need to fully recover before I can go. You know.
Well, the thing about going to the gym a bit is it is quite a big thing.
Yeah.
And it's easy to make excuses, you know, if like you're a bit tired, because you think, oh, there's no point in me going if I'm just gonna, you know, if I'm a bit tired, because I won't be doing very much, because, you know, we have this image in our head of just, you know, like a proper workout is just, you know, so extreme.
Yeah.
And that's what's held me back about it a lot, is that I just think, oh, I'm not going to do a proper workout because I'm too tired or whatever. That's the problem. But no, it's a great habit to build.
It's a hard one to overcome.
Very
too,
hard.
But I think it's an interesting point you raised about how there is this pushback, there's kind of the hustle culture, which is like both loved and loathed.
Yeah.
Like you get some people who completely hate the kind of whole, you know, as Andrew Tate's a very, very controversial man.
Very controversial, yeah.
You have people who really loathe, and I'm not going to talk about other things, but you know, but you have people who really loathe that kind of hustle culture. But you have other people I think really need it, and I think ultimately it's kind of the truth of life often is that different things work for different people. And what works for some person might not work for somebody else.
Well, I think that's a good point. I mean, you know, like a lot of successful people have worked incredibly hard to be a master in their fields, and you look at that and you think, oh, surely everyone should aspire to that.
Yeah.
But is there more diversity in humanity? Is it all right just to have people who are just happier, not aspiring to as higher heights? You know, I think it's quite possible that could be true.
It's I think ultimately you probably do. Otherwise, you'd get a world where everyone was trying to be. And then the gym's going to get very, very busy.
Yeah, exactly.
It's very
busy enough as it is.
Busy enough as it is. Yeah.
I mean, another controversial figure, but Ben Shapiro said something that I think was quite interesting. That was, don't focus on. You know, we always think, you know, especially again, like going back to it, but in the West, you know, we always say, "I'll be a rock star, be a billionaire," you know, like aim for the stars. Ben Shapiro said, it's actually better to be a good person rather than a great person.
I'd agree.
Because a lot of these people are actually, they're great in one field, but not so great in others. You know, like we all got that idea of the troubled rock star who makes great music, but actually has a very unhappy personal life. And actually it's much better to get everything pinned down to an extent rather than just be remembered for one thing. It's an interesting idea.
I think it's a very interesting, and it's very astute of Ben Shapiro to say that, because I think as well, another thing the whole idea of be good rather than great is interesting, because, you know, a lot of people we historically think of, you know, there's been a lot of pushback against Winston Churchill in recent years. A lot of pushback against Mahatma Gandhi in recent years. You know, these were men who were products of their time, and they did a lot of things which now are extreme, you know, are not. That's not the way we operate these days. But I think it reflects a deep reality that we expect great people to be good people, and if you're a military or political leader, the truth is often they're not. Often they're not good people. And that's part of their success. I mean, I slightly think with you got to be a pretty nasty piece of work to be Hitler. I think you know, obviously like the stuff Winston Churchill said about and did in the Indian famine was horrendous, but you know, credit where credit's due. I think exactly.
Like you can't just be a nice, you know, Justin. I can't see, you know, Justin Trudeau or Joe Biden, you know, really go for this sort of nice guy image, which is true to some extent. I think.
I don't think it's true for Trudeau. I think Trudeau's a complete actor in every manner.
I don't know much about it, but I've heard the same that said. But no, I couldn't see them being the Nazis, you know.
Yeah, you need a bit of fight in you.
Yeah.
It's interesting. It's a very interesting point, and I think as well, of course, you have to look at it as being that. Well, I mean, if Churchill had died after Gallipoli, he would have been remembered as a terrible military commander. It's history likes a really simple story about. Winston Churchill was a great man. Hitler was an evil man. Of course, Hitler was an evil man. I'm not going to be Kanye. Not going to be Kanye West here and go. Not going to be Kanye West and be like, I like Hitler. No, I'm not going to be like that. But like, terrible. But it loves a simple story, and the reality is people are far more complex. One thing I will say is that people like Stalin, Mao, even Hitler, they will have had good traits to their character. They will have had good traits. Now, of course, that doesn't excuse anything they did. But people are always complex. People are nothing if not complex.
Well, it takes something to be a military dictator that a lot of us don't have.
But thankfully, a lot of us don't have that. Now, that is one thing. That is one thing I am relieved that we do not have more people in the world to go, I want to be a military dictator.
Yeah. But there's a certain impetus that Hitler and Stalin share with great military or political leaders that are remembered more fondly, I think, which is like quite a dark thing.
I don't mean to interrupt, but look at Mao in China. Mao is he's not. No, he's not. That's simple. But you do have. Genghis Khan's a classic example. Ulaanbaatar Genghis Khan International Airport is the name of their main international airport.
Is it really?
I mean, he was a terrible man. Like, if he was around in the 20th century, he'd be reviled.
Yeah, I guess
history is very complex.
People kind of forget about it. I mean, Julius Caesar, Alexander the Great, we kind of see them as good figures in a way.
Yeah, I know.
And there are, I don't want to use the word admirable, but there's no better word for it. There are admirable qualities in someone who has a big influence in the world. But
certainly not necessarily admirable qualities. There's you do encounter. Well, I don't know. Is there anyone who has nothing admirable about them?
That's a good question.
That's a bigger question than tonight. I don't think we're going to answer that tonight. That's a bigger question than tonight.
Yeah. I want to talk to you a bit about the university strikes.
Go for it. Yeah, sorry, of course, we've drifted completely off that.
That's what it's all about. No, because I remember we were talking a bit, texting a bit about the university strikes in Oxford Road.
Yeah.
And obviously you were interviewing a lot of people. What was your big takeaway from it?
I think my big takeaway from it was that it's a lot more complex than I think people think it necessarily is.
Yeah.
I think everyone has their views on the strikes. It's a hugely complicated issue. And I was struck by how articulate a lot of people were, how they articulated their grievances, and I thought, wow, that's very, very persuasive.
Yeah.
I was also struck by some people who didn't know what they were talking about, but you had both there.
Okay, that's interesting.
And again, that's not to be disrespectful to them, but you did have some people that just didn't.
Well, just
but they weren't people I interviewed. They're people I just spoke to. They were just there, kind of for the. To be there.
Yeah,
to be seen,
exactly.
Be seen. Yeah.
I can imagine. No, because my impression of it as a student myself has been a little bit. I'm reluctant to say I support it, but I'm interested to hear a bit more about it because I can think. I don't really know that much about it. I mean, I remember when they were striking last year. One of my lecturers said, "I'm not going to mark your homework for this week because one of the ways you protest is we are
marking strike.
Yeah, it's a marking strike."
Yeah.
And I thought a bit like just mark it, mate. I know. I slightly thought that was a bit too far, and I was, my impression with it slightly is, university. It's not something you go into for the money. Like, I slightly think you gotta, if you want to be paid more, there are other fields you could use your intelligence in. And I find it a little disingenuous that the way people talk about it is the students that are suffering ultimately from the strikes, but the way it's sort of presented is it's the kind of necessary evil that the lecturers are taking it upon themselves to defeat the tyrannical bosses. But at the same time, you know, I know, I'm sure there is a bit of a sort of, I'm sure the money doesn't trickle down very well. I mean, Nancy Rothwell seems pretty well off, you know.
Well, I believe she is one of the lowest paid of university vice chancellors in the UK.
Is she?
As a proportion of university, it's not like she's like, oh yeah, she's skint. It's like as a proportion of university.
Well, that's very interesting, because it's, I guess, that says a lot about the kind of media or not the media necessarily, but like, I guess Manchester is quite a sort of socialist environment.
Oh yeah.
And I'm not criticising necessarily, but I think it's nice to, you know, people respond well to criticising successful entrepreneurs, you know, like the bosses. So
it's university life. Students are always gonna. The university vice chancellor, you're never gonna be.
You're not gonna be.
You're never gonna. You're never gonna go. Oh yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. Do you think that's a fair assessment on my own part, or do you think there are things I'm overlooking?
I think, I mean, obviously I have to stay completely impartial as somebody who's reported it
of
for
course,
the news.
Yeah.
I have to stay I'd say the things which kept coming up was a lot of the academics brought up the fact they are overworked and they're overstretched. You know, they've got too much to mark, they're suffering from mental health issues as a result of the stress. And ultimately it will trickle down to us as students, you know, in terms of a happy lecturer is a happy student, was their argument. Now, whether that's true or not, whether that is an argument they're using to justify it because, you know, they don't want to talk about that, I don't know. But that was certainly a repeated point that I know a lot of people I've spoken to have found very persuasive, so I'll say that much. With regards to, another criticism was the university is investing in a lot of buildings that are not really, not a lot of the funding is going towards student learning. A lot of it's going towards new buildings, new science, you know, equipment, technology, and of course that's what Manchester's big for. You know, we're fundamentally a science research university, and it's not featuring down into teaching students. Now I can understand if you're a lecturer, if you're a researcher, you want like a massive whopping great laser, it's great. But if you're a lecturer, it's not so good. You know, obviously you're passionate about your students. You like to think they're passionate about their students. Some of them aren't. You like to think a lecturer would be passionate about their students.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. Yeah, it's, I mean, what I like about your perspective on it is it's very impartial and very, very prepared to hear the other side of the story. And it's nice to, it's very refreshing because you don't get much of that.
Thank you,
nowadays. I think it's what the world needs because, especially with social media, it's just more and more polarizing, and it's a really horrible feeling to sort of to listen to the other sides. But you have to do it.
Absolutely, you do. I think it's important because, you know, I mean, particularly one thing I did notice in the US is the journalism there just is completely polarized. Like, you know, I remember when I was there a few years back now, in the morning you would watch CNN. And there'd be a section called Morning Joe, and you get Morning Joe, I can't remember his name, but Morning Joe would go on, and he'd be like, Donald Trump is a fascist dictator. And, you know, and he'd start talking about that, and then, you know, and you get all this stuff about, like, you know, the USA is, you know, worse than Nazi Germany. We got it, you know, kind of, and then in the evening you would watch Tucker Carlson's segment. He'd come on and he'd be like, "Well, Morning Joe said this morning," and he'd tear him apart. Then you turn on Morning Joe the next morning, and Morning Joe would be going, "Well, Tucker Carlson said this about me last night, and I'd like to," and they were fighting effectively. I mean, that's not journalism at the end of the day. That's like school children pushing each other and going, he started it, you know. Unfortunately, you're right though. I think that, and I thank you for your kind words, but I think that journalism I fear it happening here too. I fear that's one thing I do fear. I do fear the UK going down the line of having partisan US style press. I think that'd be very bad. Very bad for this country.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I do worry about that because I just think you just can't get anything done with that.
Yeah.
And then one side will win eventually.
Or not necessarily.
Did you not think so?
Not necessarily, no, I don't think so. I think you could end up with a situation where we just end up in a complete stalemate. And half the population believe one thing, half the population believe another thing, and they all hate each other. There's no way out of that.
Yeah, yeah.
Because they're not going away, you know, either side is not going away. You could just end up in a society where either one side has to acquiesce, which I don't think is happening anytime soon in the US.
No.
Or you can't get anything done. It's more likely that you just can't get anything done.
Yeah. Well, I'll have to wrap this up because you've got to get to your meeting.
No worries, absolutely. What's
yeah, no, I think just something to take away. I think the only way to combat that kind of stuff is by your sort of ethos of really trying to understand each side, and who knows what will happen. I mean, it's very. I'll be amazed if we manage to reconcile the kind of cultural war, you know, especially in the US. But you can but hope. You can but hope.
Absolutely. And if all else fails, listen to the US's most eminent culture warrior, Ben Shapiro, and be a good person, not a great person. Be a good person, not a great person.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much.
Well, thank you for having me on. It's been great. It's been great. Thank you very much.